For 5 years, I thought I had my life figured out. I was an architect, a profession that gave me comfort because it meant shaping things that could last. Stability, structure, permanence. That's what I valued. And in my heart, I thought I'd found the person who wanted to build that same life with me, Albert, my college sweetheart. We met when we were both 23, fumbling our way through exams and coffee fueled nights. He was always the dreamer with a camera in hand, chasing light the way most people chase air. I was the anchor, the one who carried extra batteries, the one who sat in the rain, holding his reflector so he could capture that perfect shot. Everyone said we balanced each other out, the grounded architect and the free spirited photographer. For a long time, I believed that too. We had what I used to call our blueprint: save for a house, get a dog, marry when we were ready. I repeated it to myself like a prayer, like coordinates on a map. Albert even nodded along whenever I talked about it, though his eyes always seemed somewhere else off in a place only he could see. Lately, though, the plan felt more like my blueprint, not ours. Albert had grown restless, distracted. His phone was always buzzing with new messages, his voice tightening whenever I asked about his projects. "You wouldn't get it, Allison," he'd sigh, pushing me away with words sharp enough to sting. "It's about artistic integrity. You're stable, too stable sometimes. I need to be around people who challenge me, people who see the world differently." I'd nod, swallow my protests, and tell myself it was just a phase. Artists lived in seasons, right? Maybe this was just a winter and soon we'd have spring again. So I gave him space. I poured myself into work, into saving money, into keeping our blueprint alive. I even started secretly searching engagement rings online, thinking maybe if I sparked a new chapter, he'd remember the promises we once whispered to each other in the dark. But in the quiet corners of my mind, doubt began whispering louder. Was this still our plan, or was I just building a house for two when he'd already packed his bags in spirit? That Tuesday night, I finished a project earlier than expected. The thought came suddenly, as if whispered by fate itself: surprise him. Albert had been raving about a new bistro downtown, the kind of place where creatives gathered, sipping overpriced wine and debating art until the small hours. He had wanted to take me, but we never found the time, so I decided to bring time to him. I imagined walking in, watching his eyes light up, hearing him say, "Allison, you always know how to find me." Maybe that's what we needed, a small reminder of the life we once had. I slipped into my coat, heart pulsing with a cautious hope, and drove across the city. The bistro's windows glowed amber laughter, spilling into the street. Inside, fairy lights dangled from the ceiling like stars caught in a net. The air buzzed with music, voices, energy. I stepped in, scanning the room, my lips already curved into a smile. But the smile froze, my breath snagged, and in the far corner I saw him. Albert. His hand rested gently over another woman's. Their heads leaned close, laughter soft and intimate. His entire body radiated a warmth, a connection that hadn't been directed at me in months. The sound around me dimmed, the clinking glasses, the chatter. Even the music faded into a dull hum. My chest hollowed as though the floor had opened beneath me. In that moment, my blueprint, our blueprint, didn't just feel fragile, it felt like ash slipping through my fingers. I didn't storm, I didn't scream, I didn't even cry. I simply stood there watching 5 years of my life dissolve in the glow of cafe lights. 5 years, I whispered under my breath, erased in a single night. And I took a step forward. The floor felt like it tilted beneath me as I walked toward that corner table. Each step echoed louder than the chatter, louder than the music. My body was moving, but my mind screamed, "Turn back. Pretend you didn't see." But I couldn't. Albert's laughter dimmed when his eyes met mine. His hand snapped away from hers, like a guilty flame caught in the dark. "Allison." His voice cracked, thin and nervous. "What? What are you doing here?" The woman across from him shifted uneasily, her fingers curling into her lap. She wasn't smug. She wasn't cruel. She looked aware, aware of what she'd stepped into. I let my eyes flick between them before answering. My voice steady, calm, too calm. "I thought I'd surprise you. You said you loved this place." Silence stretched over the table. Albert's lips parted, searching for words, but none came. Finally, the woman spoke softly. "I think I should go." But Albert caught her wrist lightly, a quiet panic flashing across his face. "No, wait." Then turning back to me, his tone hardened. "Allison, this isn't what you think." I tilted my head, studying him the way an architect inspects a crack in a foundation. "Then tell me, What exactly is this? The woman's chair scraped against the floor as she stood murmuring, I didn't know you had a girlfriend. Her eyes darted to me, an apology brief but heavy, and then she walked quickly toward the door. I waited. I wanted to hear Albert say it. He dragged a hand down his face, exhaling sharply. Look, I'm not sure what I want anymore. There it was, the sentence that detonated everything. Not sure. Not sure after 5 years of shared plans, of whispered promises, of mornings, where I brewed coffee while he edited photos. You're not sure? My voice was still even, but my hands clenched so tight around my purse strap that my knuckles ached. Albert, you've had 5 years to be sure. He shifted uncomfortably, his leg bouncing under the table. I feel stifled. Okay. You're incredible, Allison, but I need someone who understands me, someone who sees the world differently. I cut in finishing the line I'd heard him use like a shield so many times before. He froze. His silence was louder than the music swelling in the background. I stared at him, really stared. The man who once swore I was his anchor now looked like a stranger. His words weren't knives, they were ashes. And ashes can't cut. They just smother. A dry laugh escaped my throat, humorless and sharp. Complicated. That's what you're going to call this. His jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. He didn't beg me to stay. He didn't even apologize. That was the moment I realized he wasn't torn. He wasn't confused. He had already chosen. I gave him a slow nod, my lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. You want to figure things out? Fine. Figure them out. And with that I turned. No scene, no tears, no pleading. Just the click of my heels against the wooden floor carrying me out of the bistro and into the cool night air. The door swung shut behind me, cutting off the noise, leaving only the sound of my breath clouding in the streetlight. I walked to my car, slipped inside, and gripped the steering wheel so tightly my arms trembled. My heart didn't break in that moment. It hollowed. I whispered into the silence, my voice shaking but firm. 5 years erased. And I let it happen. Then I started the car and drove nowhere, everywhere, just to outrun the numbness before it swallowed me whole. The next morning I woke with the same dull ache in my chest, the kind that doesn't scream, doesn't stab. It just lingers heavy like a fog you can't escape. My phone lay face down on the nightstand. I didn't have to look at it to know Albert had called, probably texted too. I could almost hear the shape of his words. You misunderstood. I didn't mean it like that. We need to talk. But I didn't want his explanations. I didn't want his excuses. So I let the phone buzz. Once, twice, 10 times. Until the battery died, and with it, the last shred of curiosity I had about what he had to say. Instead, I focused on the only thing I still had control over: my exit. I started with the essentials, clothes, toiletries, the sketchbooks where I stored my designs and half-formed ideas for future projects. One suitcase, that was all. When I stepped into our shared apartment during his work hours, it was eerily quiet. Our living room, once filled with mismatched furniture we'd argued about for weeks, looked like a stage set. Soulless, pretend. I moved quickly, methodically. My books came off the shelf, my coffee maker unplugged, my framed family photos tucked carefully between sweaters. Each item I packed felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd forgotten I owned. I left the television, the couch, the expensive lamp we'd fought over in IKEA like it was a child custody battle. All his. Or maybe not his, just not mine anymore. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't spite. It was a clean cut, a surgery to remove what was infected. At the bank, I slid documents across the counter, removing my name from our joint account. My voice was calm, detached, as though I were closing a business deal, not ending a life I'd invested 5 years in. Utility bills transferred into his name. Streaming services canceled. Subscriptions we shared gone. Each signature, each confirmation felt like a nail in a coffin I didn't want, but desperately needed to build. The messages from Albert kept coming. First soft pleading. Allison, please answer. We need to talk. This isn't what it looks like. Then defensive. So you're just walking away after everything I've given you. And finally desperate again. Please, I made a mistake. I miss you. She's not who I thought she was. You're the only one who understands me. I read them all in silence, my thumb hovering over reply, before deleting each one. Not out of cruelty, out of necessity. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake in the guest room at my friend Marissa's apartment, staring at the ceiling, remembering little things, the way Albert used to reach for my hand while driving, the way his laugh once filled a room. But then I'd remember the look in his eyes at that bistro, guilty, but not sorry. And I'd remind myself that loyalty doesn't vanish in a night. It erodes slowly, quietly, until all that's left is a stranger wearing the face you used to love. I thought letting go would feel like bleeding out, but it didn't. It felt like silence, cold, clean, suffocating at first, then strangely freeing. And in that silence, a realization whispered through me like a bitter truth I could no longer ignore. Albert hadn't just betrayed me that night at the bistro. He had been leaving me for months, every dismissive sigh, every secretive text, every moment he chose artistic integrity over honesty. The bistro wasn't the betrayal, it was just the unveiling. One evening, after a week of ignoring his calls, I stood by the window of my temporary room, watching city lights flicker against the night sky. My phone buzzed again. This time the message was shorter than the rest. If you walk away from me, you'll regret it. We both will. I stared at it for a long time, my reflection faint in the glass. My face looked tired but resolute. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like his anchor. I felt like someone cutting the rope. The weeks slipped into months, and with them the noise of Albert's messages dulled. First they came daily, then weekly, then only in faint echoes until silence replaced his name on my phone altogether. I should have felt relief, and yet in the quiet, something else stirred curiosity, a dangerous kind. What had he chosen over me? What did his new life look like? The answer found me one night in the most unexpected way. It was Marissa, my friend, my shelter, who sent the link. Allison, you need to see this. Attached was a video, a shaky, furious rant filmed in what looked like Albert's cluttered studio apartment. His hair was disheveled, his voice sharp, dripping venom. So my so-called muse, he spat, pacing. Before the camera turns out, she's nothing but a poser. She doesn't care about art. She cares about clout, about likes, about money. She called her last relationship boring, said the guy was predictable, too safe. But you know what? At least boring pays the bills. At least boring isn't fake. I froze, staring at the screen. My chest tightened, but not from hurt, from recognition. Because there it was, my life, my name unspoken but carved between the lines of his bitterness. The woman he had left me for was now gone, and Albert, so desperate to paint himself as the victim, was unraveling live for anyone to see. He even held up screenshots of their messages showing her mocking him, mocking me. He's just a fallback. Allison was a safety net. That's all he'll ever be. The irony was suffocating. The man who once called me his anchor, who sneered that I was too stable, was now parading his humiliation for the world. Isn't this the guy who cheated on his girlfriend? Wow. Karma works fast. Didn't she dump him too? Guess stability doesn't look so bad now. The tide turned. The pedestal Albert had tried to climb collapsed beneath him. His friends in the art scene distanced themselves, muttering about drama and toxicity. And me, I watched from the quiet of my small borrowed room, a faint involuntary smile tugging at my lips. Not joy, not revenge, just release. For once, I didn't have to defend myself. The truth had a way of surfacing all on its own. But Albert didn't stop there. The calls resumed, only now they weren't filled with confidence. They were frantic, raw, almost pitiful. Allison, please. I made a mistake. I don't know what I was thinking. She doesn't understand me. You always did. Once he even had his mother call me. Her voice was sweet, laced with guilt. Allison, honey, Albert's in a really dark place. Could you just talk to him? He says you're the only one who truly cared. I bit my lip, listening, my hand trembling against the phone. And then I said the words that had been building in my chest for months. He made his choices, and so did I. Then I ended the call. That night I stood at the mirror, brushing my hair, staring at my reflection. My eyes looked different, sharper, not broken anymore. For the first time in years, I saw myself not someone's anchor, not someone's fallback, just Allison. And with that realization came a strange, dangerous kind of peace. Because Albert thought he'd cut me loose, but the truth, I had been the one holding him up, and now finally I'd let go. 2 years passed. 2 long, quiet years. Silence had once terrified me, made me feel hollow, abandoned, but now it had become my companion, my strength. I had left Marissa's apartment long ago. I'd built something of my own, a small studio near my firm later, a modest home with a garden I tended on weekends. It wasn't grand, but every brick, every flower felt like it belonged to me, and only me. Work flourished too. I'd started taking on projects that mattered sustainable designs for schools and community centers. Each blueprint felt like planting roots in the world, permanent in ways my relationship with Albert never was. I filled my evenings with quiet rituals, cooking for one, sketching late into the night, reading novels I'd always promised myself I'd finish. I even picked up an old childhood hobby, assembling miniature model houses, delicate, intricate, requiring patience. The irony wasn't lost on me, building little homes, when the one I shared with Albert had collapsed. But maybe that was the point. I was rebuilding piece by piece, wall by wall. Romance. That chapter stayed closed. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't afraid. I simply wasn't searching. For the first time in years, I wasn't defined by a we. I was just me. And that was enough. Or at least it was until the email arrived. It came from an unfamiliar address. Subject line, about the apartment. My heart stuttered, recognizing the implication. Our old place. The one I'd left behind with all its furniture, its debts, its ghosts. I clicked. Allison, the message began. I know this is out of the blue, but I'm in a really bad place right now. I can't afford rent anymore. They're threatening to evict me. I was hoping maybe you could help me out. Just until I get back on my feet. I know it's a huge ask, but you're the only one I can turn to. I read it twice, 3 times. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what he'd done, just a transaction, as if I were a bank, a safety net, a lifeline he was entitled to. The same man who once mocked me as too predictable now begged for the stability he'd spat on. A bitter laugh slipped past my lips. Not angry, not cruel, just incredulous. Of course. When everything else collapsed, he circled back to the anchor he thought he'd left behind. I didn't respond. I didn't delete it either. I let it sit there, a reminder. But then came the second email, sharper. So you're just going to ignore me after all we had, after everything I gave you? I can't believe how selfish you've become. My stomach tightened, but I didn't reply. Then came the third, this one colder, darker. I know where you live now. If you don't answer me, I'll show up. This is your fault, Allison. If you hadn't walked out on me, none of this would be happening. The words burned, but not in the way he intended. They didn't pull me back into fear. They pushed me forward into clarity. This wasn't love. It never had been. It was entitlement, dependency, manipulation, dressed as passion. And I realized Albert hadn't changed. Not in 2 years. Not in 10 lifetimes. But I had. I closed my laptop that night and sat by the window, looking out at the quiet street moonlight, washing over the garden I'd grown myself. Peace. That was mine. Hard-earned, carefully cultivated. He wanted me to rescue him, but I was done being his lifeboat. Still, I knew silence couldn't last forever. I couldn't let his words fester like rot in the walls of my new life. So I decided one reply, one final cut. I stared at the blinking cursor on my screen, the empty reply box waiting like a doorway. My fingers hovered over the keys, hesitant at first, then steady. I wasn't writing for Albert, I was writing for myself. The words flowed cool and precise. Albert, I received your emails. I hope things work out for you. I won't be able to help. My life has moved in a different direction, and I'm not in a position to take on new responsibilities. I wish you the best. No anger, no pity, just finality. I read it once more before hitting send. The click was quiet, almost anticlimactic, yet it felt heavier than any fight we'd ever had. That was it, the last line, the end of our chapter. The days that followed were eerily silent. No more threats, no more pleas. Just quiet, thick, absolute. And in that quiet, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace. I tended my garden in the mornings, sketched designs in the afternoons, assembled tiny houses in the evenings. Each day was mine untouched by his shadow. I thought about the irony sometimes, how he once told me I was too stable, too predictable. But stability is what he came crawling back for. And stability is exactly what I denied him. Because stability isn't about rescuing someone who throws you overboard. It's about choosing to swim even when the waves are brutal. 2 months later, I walked through a park on a crisp autumn morning, leaves crunching beneath my boots. Families laughed in the distance, dogs tugged at leashes, the world moved forward. So did I. For the first time, I didn't wonder where Albert was, or who he was with, or what story he was telling himself about me. He had become irrelevant, a ghost lingering in the corners of my memory, fading more with each passing season. And I smiled, not because I won, not because karma had punished him, but because I was free. Revenge. I realized isn't fire and fury. It isn't screaming or begging someone to see your worth. The most powerful revenge is silence. It's becoming untouchable, and I had. My story was never about Albert. It was about me finding my voice, my strength, my peace.